What's going on, everybody? It's Teej back again, this time with our first 2025 two-round mock draft. We actually do have a trade in this one, so I'm excited to go ahead and bring this updated mock draft to all of you all. Would love to have your thoughts down below in the comments section. Who goes too high? Who goes too low? Who's your favorite team? And what do you think of the picks I gave your squad? I am still using the PFF mock draft database, or mock draft simulator for right now. Eventually, I would like to get back over to mockdraftdatabase.com. And I might just start doing that once we get the records, I don't know, a little bit closer to maybe what they'll be looking like once we get closer and closer to April. Right now it has the Bengals pick a number 1 overall, and I just, that's just not really something I think is going to be super realistic. If the Bengals have the number 1 overall pick, maybe I'll be, eating crow here in a few months, but I don't think that's super likely, so I kind of want the season to play out, more games to be into that, record equation, setting up the draft order. So for right now, just gonna keep using the PFF mock draft simulator, which I do believe is based off preseason Vegas odds. So I did not make this order. I know plenty of people are still gonna be pissed at me. A lot of people won't hear this even though I'm saying it. I didn't make this order. Don't be mad at me. There's plenty of teams I would have higher or teams I'd move down the board because of where I think they're gonna finish. If you do want to know where I think these teams finish, I do have a record prediction, division prediction, Super Bowl pick, that one video kind of encompassing all of that stuff. But the fun of today, and we kick things off with the Carolina Panthers. I'm going to have them taking Will Johnson. J.C. Horn's a really good player, but availability is a big part of, the ability, when you look at all of his skills. And unfortunately enough, for the most part in his career, not been super available. And I also think CB2 in general is a major, question mark for this team long term. So I think you get a kind of slam dunk player here with Will Johnson, my number 2 player on my big board. And then hopefully you get J.C. Horn healthy, and you have an awesome cornerback tandem for the future, and it makes Ejiro Evero's job that much easier. This team does need edge, so thought about that here. But I am going to be changing with the edge order kind of to more closely fit with how I'm kind of projecting this edge class to finish out with more that I've watched with these guys. Anyways, we move on to the New England Patriots. This is one that will stay the same. I still really like Will Campbell. To me, he is a tackle. I've heard some say that they think he's a guard. More power to you if that's your kind of thought. But I definitely see him as a tackle. And once we get to the combine and get arm length measurements, that will kind of iron a lot of that out for me. But this is a team that desperately needs like a anchor to that offensive line, especially at left tackle. This is not me trying to count out Kalen Wallace, but personally saw him more as an interior guy. So maybe you have a world where Campbell gives you that immediate impact, high-level starter as a left tackle, and you get to move Kalen Wallace inside and maybe get an upgrade somewhere there on the interior. But, a team that desperately needs to upgrade that offensive line. And I'm going to say, they drafted a couple of young wide receivers, Baker, Polk, that I really, really liked, 2 of my guys from last year. So let's focus on tackle and let those young guys develop on the outside. To the Denver Broncos, I'm going to have Travis Hunter come off the board. Truly, an enigma when it comes to doing this because I think he's got Pro Bowl upside at wide receiver, all pro type of upside at corner. And there's Shohei Ohtani is really the only other player I can think of in the, scheme of sports during my lifetime that, it has this type of value, right? And Shohei, top 5 pitcher, top 5 hitter. And if we're being honest, he's probably top 1 at his best at both of those things. And Travis Hunter, like I said, you could be talking about a guy that could easily be the best receiver on this team. No disrespect to Cortland Sutton, no disrespect to Josh Reynolds, but I think Hunter's ceiling's higher than that. I don't think that's too confrontational to say. And then, looking at the corner spot, and it's like, Pat Surtain's a top 3 corner in the league in my mind, especially at his best. Hunter, in a few years, could potentially challenge or rival him for that same status. So, would be a really fun ad. I do think that number 2 corner spot's been a little better in Denver, but we'll see how it plays out throughout the rest of the season and how big of a need corner is. But to me, Hunter kind of fills 2 shoes here. Maybe you play him 75% on defense, have him being kind of that running mate with Surtain, and then time your spots on offense very selectively and make sure you're making the most of those routes run. With Hunter probably being the first or second read on that, and maybe a 70-30 split, 75-25. Maybe that's a way where you get the impact of Travis Hunter on both sides and still try to keep it at a realistic 60 to 70 snaps a week. I just don't think there's a way a guy can play 100, 120, 150 snaps depending on how many snaps there are in a game. So, like Travis Hunter, he is definitely an enigma, and I really kind of like the fit there at Denver at number 3. All right, this is where we're going to be changing things up. Ultimately, if you're asking me to put a bet down who's going to be the first edge rusher off the board, I think right now it's Abdul Carter. Was way more impressed with his hand usage than I thought I would be in that West Virginia game. Like, doesn't really feel like a guy who's first time playing edge this year. So I think he's actually a little bit further along. And they used him a ton as a blitzer, and he has some snaps at edge, but this is the first full year of getting to see it, and I don't think he's all that raw. And once we get combine testing, yeah, I think this guy's going to shoot up the board, and he's going to be edge one in this class. And for Tennessee, man, like, Harold Landry's a good player, but to add, like, this type of explosive threat, who, again, not as raw as you would think for a first-time starter at edge, that's an insane 1-2 punch. Not to mention, Tavondre Sweat, that looks like a dude right away. Just one game, but looks like a great nose tackle. And then that frees up Jeffrey Simmons to get even leaner. He said he's feeling great. He's feeling as fresh as he has during his career. And I think, yeah, losing a little weight, playing him at 3-tech with Carter and Landry on the edge, that's a really scary, front four. And you talk about Rand Carthen coming from San Francisco. I think if he could establish that front four as one of the best in the league, that would be an ideal setup for him going into next season with the Titans in year 2 of the Callahan era. And then we get to the Giants. Not going to go quarterback just yet, but we will go quarterback in this first round for the Giants. Ultimately, though, 6 drops week 1. Daniel Jones played horrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to discredit that whatsoever. He didn't play well. All that said, 6 drops from your receiver is not really helping him. So, it's like when you get a good ball from Jones, you kind of need to maximize that. So, McMillan's also a very different type of receiver than Malik Neighbors. And to be honest, Neighbors, I think you could have a 50-50 split inside and out. But if you take McMillan here, and allows you to get more opportunities with Neighbors, instead of like a 2-way go on the outside, it's a 3-way go with one of the most explosive receivers in the NFL already. That sounds a lot more appealing. So honestly, I'd move Neighbors inside if I took McMillan, play him at the X receiver spot, play him on the outside. You're gonna get the Drake London comps. You're gonna get the Mike Evans comps, and truly he plays like it. So McMillan right now, my kind of wide receiver 1B. I don't know. It just comes down to what type you're looking for. There are days where I'm like, yeah, give me that big body guy. And then there's times I watch Luther Bird and I'm like, nah, give me that dude. Because they're both freaks and they're both super special. So you can't go wrong. I just think the Giants might covet the size McMillan brings. And I think that's a great 1-2 punch at the receiver spot. And again, we're going to go quarterback here in just a little bit for the Giants. All right, then we get to the Commanders. Really would have loved to see a world where Abdul Carter could have fallen here, right? Like Dan Quinn gets his, pseudo Micah Parsons. Would have been fun, but I do think Nick Scourton's also a guy they could really use. I mean, I think there's a couple of good DTs on that roster. I'm interested to see if they'll move on from Deron Payne, but like either Allen or Payne plus Johnny Newton long term, I'm cool with that. I do think they'll move on from one of those 2 established veterans. Probably this offseason, and they need an upgraded edge. Like Dorrance Armstrong's an okay player, but they need a difference maker. And right now, I think Scourton is the most refined edge rusher in this class, widest moveset, and he's 280 pounds with good get off at that size, inside-out flexibility. So yeah, this feels like it's just helping that defensive line as a whole there in Washington, and they desperately need it. Then we get my number 1 player on my big board, off the board here for the Arizona Cardinals. I think, I had my last mock, I'm pretty sure he went number 1 overall. It's been a little bit, so maybe I'm misspeaking, but 99% sure I had him go number 1 because I wanted to make the announcement he was my number 1 player on the big board. I think a super high floor with upside that could go to Quinnen Williams, Chris Jones type of territory. So could easily see a world where in a couple of years he's a top 3 interior defensive lineman in the NFL. And I think it's as a run defender, as a gap shooter, as a power rusher. I mean, like run game, pass game, like you name it, Mason Graham makes an impact on that part of the game. I know Michigan's not looked great, so to speak, and that Texas game was ugly. But I also think that defense might be in some tough spots where they're being left out to dry because that offense has a lot to figure out. So I'm not panicking on Will Johnson, Mason Graham. I think they're sick prospects, and I'll light it up the further and further we get into this process with the combine, pro days, etc., etc. And would love to see Mason Graham partnered up with Darius Robinson, guy you could move all the way around. Mason Graham then is the fixture there on the interior D-line. Love that 1-2 punch for Jonathan Gannon. Minnesota Vikings, nothing too different here. I'm pretty sure I've mocked this in the last couple, but Benjamin Morrison, I think from a coverage standpoint, just about as good as Will Johnson. Really not much you're sacrificing there, other than about 15 pounds and then willingness to be a factor in the run game. But, for the Minnesota Vikings, I think you're looking at Mekhi Blackmon going into year 3, but coming off a pretty big knee injury this year. Obviously, the passing of Kyrie Jackson's less than ideal, and Stephon Gilmore's there on a 1-year deal. Byron Murphy II, expiring contract this year. So there's a lot of influx and a lot of question marks long-term at corner. So if you have a guy that, a little bit lighter, a little bit more slight, may not be as aggressive as a tackler as Will Johnson, but hey, the coverage skills are there and he falls to you at 8, feels like a slam dunk. And we're already starting to see Brian Flores. He's still being the kind of mastermind of showing pressure. Sometimes he's bringing it, sometimes he's not. But now with like a rejuvenated pass rush core, so like when he blitzes, it actually hits home, or when he rushes before, it can still get home. You give this guy a difference maker at corner, like Stephon Gilmore's still a good player, but like young difference maker, cornerstone of the secondary, then that defense might hit some crazy high heights. Then we get to the Raiders, and this is where we're going to have our first quarterback off the board. I am going to have Carson back. Right now, he is still my quarterback 1. I know the first half was quiet against Clemson, but really turned it on. And then there's going to be games this year where Georgia doesn't need him to play spectacular, but I think you see it in that second half against Clemson. Get the ball outside, quick decision maker, very accurate, can play with timing, and accuracy, not just putting the ball on the guys, but allowing them to be able to be factors after the catch. I think that's kind of an underrated spot, and so it's easier to see that with the All-22 than it is the broadcast angle, just given the vantage point you're given. But yeah, I think Beck does just a lot of those simple things really well, and is also not like the worst athlete. Like statue quarterbacks in 2024 are just not the same as statue quarterbacks were in 2004, and he's kind of more of that 2024 can move a little bit, just enough. Not totally a true 2004 statue, but mobility is not necessarily his calling card either. But I think you're already kind of seeing with the Raiders where Gardner Minshew, he's okay, like he's a serviceable dude. Aiden O'Connell may end up being the same thing once we get deeper in his career, but right now that feels like the weak link on that offense pretty comfortably. The offensive line can certainly get better, and hopefully JPJ, once he's healthy, is a big part of that turnaround. But yeah, I think this team needs a difference maker at quarterback. Not necessarily in love with Luke Getsy as the OC, so maybe new quarterback and new OC. I'd feel pretty optimistic about the Raiders if all that did play out. To the Seattle Seahawks, and Malachi Starks, man, he's going to be kind of a, I know I've already called Travis Hunter an enigma, but draft stock wise, like Starks is going to be another one where like take Kyle Hamilton, easily one of the best 5 players in that class, but he plays safety and he doesn't have a great 40, so like where does he go? He goes 14. Starks plays safety, but he's going to light up the combine. This guy's a freak athlete. You saw the pick against Clemson, insane play, and like legitimately playing it like a corner. So my thinking here was like, yeah, this team did give an extension to Julian Love, but the other safety spot is kind of up for grabs. And if they play Witherspoon more outside, I could also see a world where Love plays more nickel. And I just think, dude, like after seeing Mike McDonald and what he could do with Kyle Hamilton in Baltimore, let's give him Malachi Starks and let's have some fun. Play him in the box, play him in the nickel, play him over the top. Let this guy be a freak athlete with sick football IQ and great instincts, and just let him make plays all over the field. And I just think this would be a great chess piece for Mike McDonald to have there on the back end. All right, then we get to the New Orleans Saints. This one, especially after week 1, Rashid Shaheed, big game. Clint Kubiak looks like he's, kind of figured out how to give Derek Carr a little bit of a renaissance. One weekend, we'll see if that maintains. But, I didn't want to give up too quick on the tackles. Still needed more of a sample size. I do think Fuaga in that wide zone scheme looked really pretty solid week 1, and I think he's a good scheme fit for that. Really, it's like Trevor Penning. Like, what do we have there? Don't want to rush to a judgment yet, so we'll come back to that next mock. But, hey, you may not have any, super big guys other than A.T. Perry if you take Bird in here. But then you have yourself set up in this Shanahan disciple offense that wins on in-breakers, speed, getting playmakers into space, letting them do their thing in yards after the catch situations. And you have Chris Olave, who's not really going to do the yak stuff, but all the other stuff. He can, not necessarily one-to-one, and we're not talking about San Francisco necessarily, scheme and players matching up to San Francisco, but Ayuk, okay after the catch, but you think of him as one of the best route runners in football. Let's let Chris Olave kind of be that. Luther Burden as a field stretcher and kind of being the yak, end around, put him in the backfield, Debo-ish. Again, not one-to-one, just kind of using this as a broad strokes. That's kind of fun to think about. So I also and Rashid Shaheed does some of that too. So just having Shaheed and Burden both be these insane, you got to watch them every time they go in motion, kind of like what Miami has. You put Hill in motion, but it's like, all right, I got to keep an eye on Achane, I got to keep an eye on Hill. Don't forget Waddle. You got to put these defenses into binds because of how much speed and yards after the catch ability you would have, plus the route running ability and big play threat that comes with Chris Olave. And then you have A.T. Perry as the size guy if you want, and you lean into Juwan Johnson at tight end for that. So I haven't had this happen in a mock. Saints fans, let me know. Kind of a long-winded explanation there, but would you be down for Luther Burden if he fell in your lap at 11? Pair him up with Shaheed and Olave? seems awesome. Really excited to see where Clint Kubiak takes the rest of this year in regards to that offense. All right, then we get to the Buccaneers. I'm going to go Siobhan Ravel, someone that really wasn't on my radar. And then, Dane Brugler hypes him up and says, okay. Then, and Dane's one of those guys for me where it's like, if he's talking about someone I haven't heard of, I need to make sure I go check him out. And Ravel lived up to it. Oh my gosh. Size, speed, freak. And that's kind of why I was like, this is a Todd Bowles dude. And I know I said that a couple times with dudes last year like Kool-Aid McKinstry, but I think Ravel is just going to be another level of an athlete. So, 12 is probably about as high as you're going to see him go in a mock draft, and maybe that is a little rich. He does come from a smaller school, and we'll see if he really has any big tests. When you look at the schedule that ECU has, there's not really a test there that's like, okay, circle the calendar, watch that game. But Quinyon Mitchell still went in the first round. Didn't go 12, but he did still go in the first round. So maybe, Ravel can kind of piggyback off that trend. And again, I do think he is a Todd Bowles type of corner, and I do think they could use another outside cornerback. Indianapolis Colts up next. I'm going to go Deion Walker. He was one of the guys for my last mock that I was like, why did I let Walker fall so far? So we have him going 13. Grover Stewart is someone that I get the sense that, and Colts fans starting to let me know that they love him, and he does feel like a fan favorite. You could save $6 million against the cap next year by releasing a 32-year-old defensive tackle. No disrespect. That would be a move I'd make. And not only are you saving $6 million next year, you're freeing up another 12 the year after. So I'd go ahead and move on. And especially if it's with the selection of Deion Walker here at 13, right? Let Walker be that big body freak, and then let him be the replacement for Grover Stewart and the running mate for DeForest Buckner. Save some of that cap space, pay your guys, or use that to go out and make a move in free agency. Even if you're doing it at the time of the draft, because who knows if we'll get Walker, that's fine. They're still good free agents, and honestly, that $6 million you'd save might be the difference in you getting one more corner to be a kind of 1 year stopgap option, or one more whatever to kind of be a 1 year mercenary for you. So I'm totally on board for this. I do know that Stewart's a fan favorite for the Colts, but 32-year-old defensive tackle, once we get to next year, you eventually got to start looking for replacements. Then we get to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know if anybody's really ready to do this in Pittsburgh, but let's just have a quick conversation. As much as I did think Justin Fields had a better preseason than Russ, it wasn't by a margin that you'd say you have to play this guy. Not by any stretch, even as someone who was pounding the table for Fields to start. And you see it even in the Falcons win, right? That was a really solid game plan Arthur Smith put together. And it was a really solid game plan, and it makes you think how long was he thinking about this? When did the Russ injury really pop up? I don't know. Just kind of, I guess, conspiracy theory thoughts there. I digress. Russ isn't the long-term answer. And the Steelers, yes, good win behind Justin Fields, but no touchdowns. And we had to rely on TJ Watt being in the backfield basically every play, and Boswell nailing 6 field goals, and I believe 3 of them beyond 50 yards. Most accurate kicker in NFL history from beyond 50, which is insane. But also, you don't have the 5th-year option picked up for Fields. So if moving forward, it's kind of more the same, he's pretty good, you're kind of engineering a game plan to win with him, I could see a world where they bring him back. I definitely could. And try to build off of, using his legs, and especially bringing a safety down the box because of his legs, or taking a guy out of coverage because of his legs, and they have to use a spy on that play. And that sets up one-on-one shots for George Pickens at the end of the first half, and he wins that, and then you get a field goal. There's a lot of stylistic advantages that Fields brings to this offense, but there's also no long-term commitment. And Pittsburgh could look at a world where they're like, hey, he was okay. We had to do a lot of coaching to maximize what we had there. We want a true signal caller. And then Shadir Sanders comes into play, right? And this guy's already playing behind a bad offensive line. I don't think the Steelers are that bad, comparatively speaking, college versus NFL. Maybe you go receiver here. But I also just kind of want to talk about quarterback. There is no long-term investment in either one of the guys the Steelers have on roster. So if Sanders falls in the lap at 14, I don't know. This feels like a spot where I think Deion would be fine with him going, if that's really going to be a thing. And I think, Mike Tomlin, Shadir Sanders, I think that could be a nice 1-2 kind of face of the franchise moving forward for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Steelers fans, let me know. I'm also not opposed to, especially if Fields starts playing even better from a passing standpoint, fine with bringing him back on a 2 to 3, 4-year deal, depending on the price point, of course. Anyways, let's move on to the Rams, and we're going to actually stay in the queue. Actually, not yet. Thought about that. We will eventually talk quarterback with the Rams here in one of these mocks. But given what's happened week 1, I had to pivot here from quarterback to go offensive line because, Joe Noteboom, Alaric Jackson, with him being suspended, left tackle is already something I was kind of like, they might want to go ahead and make a big investment there. And then you have major injuries on the interior offensive line. Rob Havenstein misses week 1. Hopefully he's back by week 2. But yikes, that tackle spot's looking pretty iffy right now for Los Angeles. So Kelvin Banks Jr., another one of these guys where I've heard some people say move him inside to guard. I get it, but I also think he's a great pass protector. Let's at least stick with this high-level pass-protecting left tackle for an offense that is going to try to air it out, at least until they get into the red zone. And then when he does connect on run plays, he's been great. It's just kind of boom-bust there in the run game standpoint. But looking at the left tackles that the Rams have on roster right now, it's hard not to imagine Kelvin Banks as a long-term upgrade there. Then we get to the Jags. We're going to stay in the trenches here, and we're going to go Emory Jones Jr., repeating myself here. Some people see him as a guard, including Trevor Sikkema, who runs the PFF. He really kind of just runs PFF content right now, but especially the draft board here. Still have him at tackle, and that's kind of the way I'm evaluating him. Once we get to the combine, I get or even the Senior Bowl, and once I get official arm length measurements, we can go from there. I am a pretty hard arm length threshold dude, so that will kind of be the dictating point for tackle versus guard. Because a lot of people at this point were saying Fuaga is going to definitely be a guard, right? Like, turns out he had longer arms than Joe Alt, so you just don't know until you know. So right now, I just think plan in place. Let's draft Emory Jones. Let's play him at right tackle. Let's flip Anton Harrison over to left tackle where he played his college ball. Cam Robinson, last year of his deal. Walker Little, last year of his deal. Tackle wouldn't shock me here in the first round for the Jags. Cleveland Browns here at 17, and this is where I decided I had to make some pivots, and I'm going to go quarterback here. Look, I get it. It's fully guaranteed, and there's not a clean way of moving on from Deshaun Watson, but there wasn't a clean way necessarily for the Broncos to move on from Justin Fields. There wasn't a pretty or clear way for the Falcons to move on from Matt Ryan, but sometimes you just got to swallow that pill, and I think the Browns, man, we're kind of... I think we might have already been there, but now it's kind of getting to a point now where everyone's looking at the elephant in the room except for the Browns, and they're just like refusing to acknowledge it. Week 2, we might see Jameis Winston replace him if Watson doesn't get better this week against the Jags, ironically the team picking in front of him. And look, if you're going to have Watson still in the roster and you don't feel like you can cut him, or if you do decide to cut him and you have all that dead cap, rookie quarterback's really the only other way you can maintain the flexibility and how many good players are on that roster, given the contracts they've already paid to some of those dudes and the contracts they're going to have to dish out to some of the other guys. Might have to go rookie quarterback. First round, Quinn Ewers looked great this year at Texas. Love the mobility. He looks way more confident. He's keeping his eyes downfield in the move, too. So it's just those kind of little things that you saw it in big games, but you didn't see it in like lesser opponent, contests from, Quinn Ewers. Now it just feels like he's just got that edge and he's taking that step forward. Maybe the game's also moving a little slower for him. I could see that where like now it just feels like he's gotten the rhythm and the timing and just into the flow in which college football plays at. So going to be a little bit of an adjustment there at the NFL level, but through 2 games, Quinn Ewers looking really, really good and looks like a guy who can move up even further on this board. Because, like the legs are solid and the arm strength's definitely there and moments of superb accuracy. It's just more so finding consistency. Through 2 weeks, he's been consistent. Let's get on to the Chicago Bears here at 18. I'm going to go Michael Williams. Defensive line played pretty well just through 1 week, though, so we'll see what the PFF grades and, where my eyes kind of see this team going. But edge/interior defensive line, Michael Williams, former IDL player at Georgia. Now they're playing him at defensive end. But even that, defensive end for Georgia is kind of like a 4-eye alignment head-on with the tackle, so it's not true like getting wide of the tackle. That said, Matt Eberflus, kind of your traditional 4-3 base, quote unquote. Nickel's the new base, but 4-man front, you got a lot of flexibility there with Williams. Early downs, you could play him at edge and have him and Sweat be an insane run-stopping tandem. On top of some of the guys they've invested, like a Gervon Dexter, thought he looked okay, pretty solid actually week 1. Hopefully he keeps getting better. Zach Pickens, Andrew Billings, still have those guys there filling out the rest of the interior. And then you can get into passing situations, and then you move Michael Williams on the inside and get another, kind of mercenary third down specialist, pass down specialist there on the edge spot. So a lot of flexibility comes with Michael Williams. Like the talent, like the upside. It's just he's a bit of a projection and unfortunately got hurt in that Clemson game, which is going to make this projection and this evaluation that much harder for me and plenty of other people. But I still believe in the high-end talent. I do think he's a really good fit there for Matt Eberflus. Then we get to the Los Angeles Chargers. This one I'm going to have James Pierce Jr. go. Probably as low as you'll see him in any of the mocks at this point. But at this point, kind of a small sample size. He hasn't really played great. Really, Tennessee's edge room as a whole has impressed me more than I can say James Pierce Jr. has impressed me. I still believe there's a lot of talent with his first step get off. He's still probably got the best bend in the country as well. So yeah, there's insane talent there. But now I don't think he's going to have a full-time role, to be honest. When we look at his final snap count at the end of the year, I don't think it's going to be 900 snaps. Like, I think that's going to be something we're talking about the next level. And that being said, you look at the Chargers, and Bosa looked really good week 1. Mac, coming off a good year, looked really good week 1. Both those guys are old. Both those guys, big cap numbers. And I think actually Mac last year for his deal might be a year off on that. And then you have Tuli Tuipulotu kind of waiting the wings. And let's just say Bosa and Mac are both gone next year. Tuipulotu plus Pierce, I think Harbaugh could be the guy to kind of get him more comfortable and in, I don't want to say he's out of shape, but like in shape for a full-time, full starting role, 900 plus snaps in a year, that sort of stuff. And I actually think Tuipulotu to Pierce, two very different stylistic edge rushers, would actually make for a nice 1-2 punch there in LA. Perfect world, maybe Mac's gone, but you got Bosa back and they can keep him playing at a high level. And then James Pierce Jr. here at 19 can start his career as a mercenary, designated pass rush guy, and eventually become a full-time starter for Harbaugh and the Chargers. All right, on to the Houston Texans. Another Michigan defender comes off the board here in the form of Kenneth Grant. Freaky athlete, Bruce Feldman, freaks list dude for good reason. Really solid run defender. And unlike Chris Jenkins, I think there's a little bit more room for pass rush ceiling. Jenkins, maybe I was a little optimistic once, like around August of last year, just like before the season starts, like early August, maybe even the summer months before that, just thinking, hey, this guy plays really strong for 295. Maybe there's more room, at least as a pass rush, a power rusher from the interior. But, once you get into a couple games last year, it's like, Chris Jenkins, he's just a run defender. It's okay. Kenneth Grant, though, I think I see it a little differently. Still get the high-end athleticism and the run stopping. Honestly, a better athlete than Chris Jenkins, and Jenkins is a good enough athlete as is. But I think with the quicks in the combination of power, there's room for him to become at least, again, speed to power, bull rush type up the middle, and then, learn a move or two. A couple of counters there from the interior. Kenneth Grant could be something even more special. This is a Houston team that I was like mocking interior defensive linemen to all the time after the trade with Minnesota last year. They were picking at 42, and I was like, this is a great spot to go get Braden Fisk. Didn't end up happening. That's totally okay. I like Kamari Lassiter a lot too, but maybe here in the first round, they could go ahead and get that interior defensive lineman of the future. To the New York Jets, Kevin Winston Jr., simply put, man, I see a lot of Jaquan Brisker in Winston Jr.'s game. I know it feels like helmet scouting, but seriously, the combination of being a high-end box player and run defender on top of awesome fluidity and great coverage skills makes this guy a really kind of jack of all trades. Play him over the top, play him in the box, could even get kind of interesting with it and play him in the nickel if you really want. The Jets probably wouldn't. They already got a guy for that in Michael Carter II, who's a really good nickel defender. But just what you could do between moving him from free and strong would be really fun, especially for a team that flips between quarters and cover 3 a ton. Primarily it's cover 3, but they mix in some quarters as well. So you have some flexibility about where you're lining up Winston, where on the field he's defending in a primarily zone-heavy scheme. So a lot of fun. Love the athlete. Love the flexibility he brings. Safety is one of the few spots that you look at on the Jets roster and you say, you could use a little bit of an upgrade there. So I think here, Winston Jr. here at 21, that's the upgrade they're looking for. Atlanta Falcons are up next, actually staying in the Big Ten. I'm going to go to Denzel Burke. Thought about Tacario Davis, but Raheem Morris primarily cover 3, cover 4 guy. So as much as like Tacario Davis, I want him to be a better like off-ball zone coverage guy, just considering his athleticism and his size. He's much more of a man-press dude right now. Hopefully he does get better in zone because that would be awesome to see for his draft prospects, but also just as a consumer of NFL product. But Denzel Burke, I think, does come with a little bit more balance between man and zone, and honestly might be a little bit better in zone right now. But prototypical size, prototypical athleticism, solid tape so far. Once we get further into 2024, into bigger games for Ohio State, we'll have some even more tape to kind of evaluate there in those big game spots. But I think 2023 was a huge step in the right direction from 22. No reason to think he won't take at least another small step forward here in 24. So I think he's kind of in that late first round mix. I think he's a really solid fit in that Falcons scheme for Raheem Morris, playing that corner 2 spot, partnering up with A.J. Terrell. All right, Miami Dolphins are up next at 23. I'm going to go ahead and have Isaiah Bond come off the board. I might, maybe it's, just kind of recency bias, but after watching Thursday Night Football between the Jets and the Miami Dolphins, and also, like, just real quick, could have gone quarterback, I guess, but I'm going to let Tua Tagovailoa make his own decision about what he wants to do with his life. I think there's merit to a guy who loves the game, wants to keep playing it. I can't tell him how to live his life, and I wouldn't want to be told not to do something I love. That being said, 4 concussions in 2 years, and they only continue to do more and more damage to your head. I might tell you to go ahead and step aside. We'll see what Tua decides to do. So I'm kind of taking quarterback out of the equation here until we have that clarity. But I think you saw on Thursday night, when they're not throwing at 10 or 17, shit is hard for that offense to move. And Devon Achane out of the backfield. But if it's not Achane or one of those two receivers, it's kind of a struggle bus. Because Robbie Chosen doesn't know what route to run. And Dude Man 88 can't even look at the right time. Even though it was a dot by Tua. Couldn't have put it on him any better. So let's find some addition. And who knows, Malik Washington, I did tweet. Follow me on Twitter if you want, or X, formerly known as Twitter. I did have a tweet mid-game. I saw some of the snaps and stuff from other receivers and kind of the success rate for the Dolphins. And I just quote tweeted it saying, they need Malik Washington, essentially. It's a Malik Washington tweet. So who knows, Malik Washington might step up and be that receiver 3. But, maybe he was drafted on day 3 for a reason, and maybe I'm just overly optimistic about a guy that went that low for, a reason maybe. Isaiah Bond, though, fits a lot of their MO, right? Super fast, great with the ball in his hands after the catch, field stretcher, and as that number 3 guy, and again, when you win with speed, I feel like your snap counts have to be different than someone who wins with size, like Mike Evans, right? It's just a different game you're playing. So I think you need less snaps for Tyreek and Waddle to keep them fresh and keep that speed component a thing that they can win with. And I think adding Isaiah Bond into a rotation with those other two, you keep speed a threat for all 3 of these guys. And Bond right now, my receiver 3, I think he's a sharp route runner, especially down the field, but I also think he's got more suddenness and shiftiness than people give him credit for as an underneath route runner. Like, not quite Jameson Williams, but shades of that. Like, when he runs an inside slant, it's not sloppy. So I think Bond's going to keep getting better this year. He's going to be a huge part of that Texas offense moving forward still. So him and Wingo, too. Freshman's a freak. But he's going to be a big focal point in that offense. A lot of big games still ahead for Isaiah Bond. Kind of an interesting idea, adding him in to that speedy receiver rotation in Miami. Let's go on to the Green Bay Packers at 24. This is where I'm going to have Tacario Davis come off the board. Already profiled him a little bit, but big size, speed, freak. Like him in man coverage. We're only one game in, but unfortunately, Jeff Hafley, the defense didn't play all that different than what it was under Joe Barry. And Jair's still there, but I could see a world last year, the contract for Eric Stokes. Maybe they're trying to find an upgrade there. We'll see. As the year goes on, Stokes might improve, so I'm not trying to count him out, but to me, between Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, which one would you want to move on from at the end of this year? It's probably Eric Stokes. I'm also a pretty big Jair Alexander guy. I think at the top of his game, he's one of the best corners in football. But again, we'll see what the rest of 2024 takes us. But I like the idea of Tacario Davis in a primarily man-heavy defense. Also a lot of cover 3, but I think Tacario Davis can play a lane, especially with his size and his athleticism. You can simplify it enough, play this lane, use your ball skills. It is definitely an area he needs to improve, though. Dallas Cowboys next up at 25. Easy one here. Ashton Shanti. He's been my RB1. And that's no disrespect to Quinshon Judkins because he'd be RB1 just about any other year. But Ashton Shanti, dude, this guy is so fun to watch. I mean, shades of like MJD, Alvin Kamara. And like Kamara is a tough one to throw out there because it feels like one running back a year gets a Kamara comp and you're like, come on, man. You can't just be giving out Kamara comps. This is the one that actually, when draft Twitter starts throwing that out there, I'm like, nah, the lower half, the contact balance, the receiving skills, that's there. Like, there's some of that for sure. So Ashton Shanti, big fan of his. And honestly, they haven't really even used him as a receiver this year. I think he's got 12 catches so far. If they can do a game where you get to really see what he can do as a pass catcher, he's going to have people's jaw even more on the floor because it's sick. You go back and watch 2023's tape. It's a lot of fun to watch, but super shifty, long speed, short area burst, prototypical build, hard to see behind those big offensive linemen, plenty of burst to play outside, power to play inside. I mean, I can go on and on and on about Ashton Shanti. Then we get to the Eagles here at 26, and we're going to go with one of my favorite players in this class. And he's really one of my favorite players to have people say his name, Jonah Savaiinaea. Another one of these guys where, maybe Savaiinaea's a guard, maybe, potentially. We'll let the measurements get us there. Right now, I think this is your right tackle of the future. This is your Lane Johnson kind of replacement waiting in the wings. We'll see what happens. Mekhi Becton, I think that's a one-year deal, so maybe they move on from him. You do play Savaiinaea at guard and then move him to tackle. 1,000 people I talked about this during the 2023 draft cycle, 2024 draft cycle. But I think right now, let's just draft Savaiinaea and just say, hey, Lane Johnson, the career is going to eventually end. Savaiinaea, that's your replacement. Maybe they bring back Becton because they look pretty good against the Packers. But that was also a tough game to be a pass rusher. Not a whole lot of grip to push off of on that field, unfortunately, in Brazil. So we'll see as the year goes on. We'll see what they decide to do with Becton. But Savaiinaea, either as a right guard or a right tackle, I think it's a great fit for that zone blocking scheme in Philly. Next up, Detroit Lions. This is another one. Sorry, Lions fans. I hate to be boring, but honestly, through 2 weeks of college football, Princely Uman Mielen, another great name in this draft class, has looked stellar. I've loved him a ton. Against some pretty weak competition, admittedly. But you totally see it, 6'4", 255, good speed off the line of scrimmage, enough bend, but also some power, and honestly, pretty solid moveset as of right now. So kind of this guy who I think he's primarily winning with his size and his athleticism for sure, but I don't think he's as raw in the other areas as you may think. So I think he deserves first round love, and hopefully once Ole Miss starts playing some stiff competition, he starts to become more and more widely acknowledged, because I think maybe that's what draft community is kind of waiting on. Hey, they played a bunch of nobodies, essentially, no disrespect. But let's see him do it in a prime-time SEC matchup. And hopefully, once he does, he'll start getting into more first-round mock drafts. Cincinnati Bengals, this is super lazy. And admittedly, as big an Eric All guy as there could have been last year. But at this point, Colston Loveland, to me, is a first-round tight end. This is one of the easiest teams to kind of mock. Who needs a tight end? Oh, the Bengals. So I think, Loveland's getting better as a blocker this year through 2 games, so that's been nice to see. And he doesn't have to be all world because of what he brings you as a receiver. Plus athleticism, not earth-shattering, but plus athleticism. Really solid understanding of route running and how to find the soft spot in zones as well, so he can beat man, he can beat zone. Really solid pass catcher too, soft hands. And also could be used, as a yards after the catch threat just because he is a bit of a tank. So a lot of different ways you can use them. In Cincinnati, obviously, like tight end, you can get better. I'm assuming T. Higgins is going to be gone once we're, next April. So a couple of pass catchers you're going to have to replace. I like Yoshivas, but receiver could definitely be in play here. But Loveland could also be a little bit of a slot player for you too. So a lot of different ways the Bengals could go to kind of replace that pass catching production through the aggregate. I think Loveland's a good way of at least getting a first step in the right direction. Buffalo Bills at 29. This is where we're going to have our trade for today's video. I'm going to have Brian Daboll and the New York Giants give up pick 37 and 69 for picks 29 and 119. We're going to go ahead and force this trade. And with the New York Giants moving up, I'm going to give them quarterback Cam Ward. Ward's really impressed me. Obviously, Florida doesn't look quite as good as maybe we would have hoped they would. And then, North Florida had, or Florida A&M, whoever they played week 2, I think it was Northern Florida. They didn't look great here. I could just go ahead and tell you. They didn't look super awesome. But that being said, I couldn't tell you from the logo. That being said, just from that week 1 game, it's funny. Some people have comped Shadir Sanders to Geno Smith accounting for inflation. He's almost, and I'm kind of more in line with Trevor Sikkema. He's more Teddy Bridgewater accounted for inflation. If you're going to say anybody's Geno Smith accounted for inflation, it might be Cam Ward, to be honest with you. I just think the arm strength's way more alive there for Ward than it is Shadir. Not that Shadir has a bad arm. I think Dano kind of giving people hate narrative that they didn't need after that week 1 win, but I digress. Another video for another time. But Cam Ward, man, the arm strength's there, enough mobility through 2 games, and again, bad competition there in week 2. But against Florida, he looked like as confident a college player as I've seen, dude. Total command of the offense, total command of the game, great pocket presence. He still had that 1 pick, and you're going to have to live with that. But who better to know that than Brian Daboll, assuming he does still have this job, which it might be a bit of an if the Giants are going to be as rough as they looked week 1. But that being said, if Daboll's still around, he knows better than anybody. Hey, you can deal with 1 to 2 boneheaded plays. They don't even always turn into turnovers. Sometimes, you get lucky and you'll have 3 turnover-worthy plays, only 1 pick, right? But if he's going to bring the upside and the top-end plays that only a handful of guys can give you, you live with it. As long as there's not too many boneheaded plays that totally derail a season. So, Tetaroa, McMillan, Malik Neighbors, Cam Ward, sounds super exciting to me if I were a Giants fan. All right, let's get on to the Baltimore Ravens here at pick 30. I'm going to have Tate Ratledge be the pick here. Between the 2 interior offensive linemen, admittedly, I was much higher on Andrew Voorhees, so I'm not worried about him. Daniel Falele, this massive human being who was too slow to play tackle, I'm not entirely sure that's going to work out all that well at guard. Neither one of those guys looked great week 1, but Chris Jones was legitimately just picking on 2 first-time starters. And when your first start's against Chris Jones, sorry, it's going to be a bad one. So many people are trying to write this as, Voorhees is done. We'll see. Let's let the rest of the season play out, and we can go from there. I'm more worried about Falele, kind of leaning back on my draft priors, and I definitely didn't see him as a guard. So I think Ratledge, the starting right guard for Georgia, who honestly might have the best interior offensive lineman across the board. Maybe not center. I still like Parker Bracewell a ton. He's my top center in the draft, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But Georgia might have the 2 best guards in the country right now, and Ratledge, their right guard, plug-and-play replacement there for Falele. Then we get to the 49ers at 31. I'm going to go Blake Miller. This is a big Trevor Sikkema guy. I like the feet. I like the movement skills. Like to see him add a little bit more power in his profile. But that being said, for this scheme, wide zone, get out and move, get to the second level, this might be the perfect scheme for him. And Colton McKivitt's 1-year deal. He's also super replaceable, no disrespect. But I think Blake Miller could simultaneously just allow you to let McKivitz walk, get younger, get cheaper, and potentially, more than likely, get better at that spot. I don't know. Don't want to just assume. Then we get to San Francisco here at 32. I'm going to go Dante Corleone, the Godfather. I just think that interior defensive line could definitely use another high-level run stopper. And I think this just, especially, Chris Jones is right now the best interior defensive lineman in football. But as he's getting up there at age, it might be wise to just say, hey, what responsibilities can we take off his workload so we continue to get the best interior pass rusher the game has? Well, adding a Dante Corleone who's primarily there to stuff the middle and be a high-level run defender, that might be a good way of doing it, and just let Chris Jones move across the defensive line, pin his ears back, and just pick on rookie offensive linemen, or just tear up the weakest link of that offensive line, whoever it may be. So I think this frees up Chris Jones to focus that much more on being the best interior pass rusher in the NFL. Corleone, only one game so far this year, first round for a really high-level run defender. It feels a little rich, but I wanted to talk about it here. Defensive line, something I've been talking about in the last couple of years worth of mocks for the Chiefs. So Chiefs fans, let me know. Would you be excited about Corleone, the Godfather, partnering up with Chris Jones? All right, let's get into the second round here. Going to pick up the pace. Go Ariante Ursary here for the Bears. I think we're at this point now where we have to decide, is Braxton Miller, not who I'm talking about here, Braxton Jones, is he good for a fifth rounder? Maybe. Potentially. Let's just say yes. But is he good enough to be an every down starter? And to me, that's two different questions. Sometimes we get too caught up with he's good for this or he's fast for this. But ultimately, you just have to drop that and say, is he good enough to start? Is he good enough for the NFL? Is he fast enough for the NFL? So like, it's one of those things where yeah, he runs X amount of time at 370 pounds. That's insane, for sure. But how does that stack up against other people who are just more traditional size for the NFL and maybe just aren't that big? Just kind of using that's kind of a John Lender thought that I think is kind of true. So Ariante Ursary, I think he could potentially be that upgrade there for Braxton Jones at left tackle if we get to the point where he may be good for a left tackle, but he's not good enough for a team that wants to make the playoffs. Then we get to the New England Patriots at 34. This one I'm going to have Harold Perkins come off the board. The Patriots have been pretty solid at linebacker the last couple of years, and I don't think there's a reason for me to think that's going to change. But Perkins is a different type of linebacker than Jelani Tavai and Juwan Bentley and things like that. Much more, honestly, his calling card is being a pass rusher. Going back to Belichick's, old days and some of his disciples like a Brian Flores, they want to blitz those linebackers. So Perkins, very different skill set, much more athletic than those other guys. And you could even use him as third down designated pass rush guy. The weight's going to be a big thing here. If he can get up to 225, I think there is a world where he could play hybrid, early downs off ball, passing downs, third and longs. You play him at edge, especially if Josh Uche doesn't come back. He's on a 1-year deal. I could see where he is kind of that hybrid off-ball linebacker Uche replacement next year. Let's go to the Denver Broncos at 35. I'm going to go with Georgia's left tackle, Ernest Green III. Only a handful of snaps into his season, but Garrett Bowles' contract year, I could see a world where he ends up becoming a guy who shoots up the board. Couple different left tackles you could have gone with here. Josh Simmons, Tyler Booker, I see more as a guard right now. Anthony Belton's an interesting name, but pass pro-wise has been a little raw, and let me just see more of what he brings to the table this year for NC State. So, bit of a projection pick, but I do think left tackle might be something that the Broncos are trying to move on from, get younger, get cheaper, move on from Garrett Bowles, let him hit free agency. Also, right tackle, I don't know how soon they can get out of that Mike McGlinchey deal without some dead cap, but eventually they might be looking for a better pass protector on the right side as well. Tennessee Titans at 36. I think this is your Tyler Boyd replacement, Emeka Egbuka. Hey, he might have the skills to play on the outside, and because of that, maybe he's also simultaneously DeAndre Hopkins' replacement. But he might just be best suited to play from the slot and keep him as just this elite, route runner. Because, honestly, you could have him add weight, play on the outside, maybe be better against press. But he's just so quick and sharp out of his breaks and just kind of sudden. And he's just a really nuanced route runner, really understands how to get open, both against man and zone. I'd almost just rather keep him at his current size, play him in the slot, and again, use him as a Tyler Boyd replacement. Nice 1-2 punch there between him and Calvin Ridley as well. Let's get to the Buffalo Bills now. I'm going to have them take Danny Stutzman. Look, it's another year of Matt Milano being injured. I think he's one of the probably 5 best off-ball linebackers in the NFL when healthy. Back-to-back years now where we can't say that's true. Terrell Bernard, sounds like the injury isn't too serious, which is good. He's a good player. He's a good fit, but feels like they've had to do a lot with, lesser round guys. And maybe that's a part of their MO, right? Like we saw the Rams win a Super Bowl kind of with that. I also think Danny Stutzman could be a pretty solid upgrade, get younger at that position, get healthier at that position, and a guy who I think could do a lot of that stuff. Great downhill linebacker. Feel like he's getting a little better in zone, but I also think that coaching staff could improve maybe his weakness in zone coverage and still let him be what he is as a high-level downhill backer. Then we get to the Washington Commanders at 38. This is where I'm going to have Josh Simmons come off the board. He's playing left tackle right now for Ohio State, and Brandon Coleman to me more of probably a guard. I know he had his fans. We'll see how he plays this year starting at left tackle, so he has some flexibility. You could draft Simmons and he becomes your left guard of the future, or ultimately, kind of where I think this would play out, Simmons becomes your left tackle, Coleman moves inside to his more natural position at right guard. I would still love to see this team move Sam Cosmi back to tackle, but I don't think that's going to happen, even though they did just give him that extension. Pick 39, Arizona Cardinals. I'm going to give them Jack Sawyer here, and man, I put my kind of, I don't want to say neck on the table, but I made it known. I think Sawyer's going to be the better of the two edge rushers this year for Ohio State between him and JT Tuimoloau. And Sawyer's played really well so far. High-end athlete, former 5-star recruit, and has the body to play every down. B.J. Ojulari coming off an injury. Because of his length and weight in general, he's probably more of a passing down only dude. But now I'm thinking, hey, Zaven Collins, I always saw him as an edge. Glad that they finally figured that out. For whatever reason, the Cardinals just really love moving these guys to a non-native position and then eventually moving them back to their native spot at edge. But I think Zaven Collins looks really good there. Him and Sawyer could be those, starting every down edge rushers. You get interesting, you get flexible with Sawyer. He could move inside on passing downs, and that allows you to get B.J. Ojulari on the field as well. And then you could even do the same with Collins and get Dennis Gardeck out there. The barbarian, got to get him his snaps. Buffalo Bills here at pick 40. I'm going to go to the interior defensive line. Another spot where, Ed Oliver's gotten out to a slow start. I don't want to, call that quits. But Tyleik Williams, high-level run defender, massive human being. Ed Oliver, not the biggest, I don't want to say he's not the strongest. That's not really my problem here. Not the greatest run defender. And again, size, not really his, biggest calling card either. So shades of what we talked about with Chris Jones. How can we maximize Ed Oliver? Let's take the brunt of being an every down run defender off of his plate. Tyleik Williams is going to eat up space, clog the middle. That makes Ed Oliver that much more potent as a one-on-one winner, pass rush winner. Especially just like these two guys lined up, it's almost hard not to give Williams the double team just because of how large of a human being he is. So I think it just frees up Ed Oliver to hopefully get him back to where he was closer to last year, maybe even take a step forward from where he was last year. They did give him a lot of money on that extension after all. So then we get to the Raiders here at 41. And hey, the Raiders have problems to fix. I get it. So, I don't love the idea of going quarterback, running back. But that being said, you do look at their roster, and those are kind of the most average spots they have right now. They have okay quarterbacks. They have guys that play running back. And I'm not trying to count on Zamir White. Maybe he'll get better as the year goes on. But to go from that to a backfield of, Carson Beck and Quinshon Judkins, that sounds pretty freaking awesome to me. So Judkins, I think, immediately would step on that roster and be more explosive than Zamir White, better between the tackle runner than Alexander Madison, better pass catcher than both those guys. So yeah, just an answer across the board at running back for the Raiders. Then we get to the Saints at 42. This is when I have Parker Brailsford come off the board. Again, to me, the best center in the class. Weight's going to be the conversation around him. There really isn't a precedent for a 275-pound center. Kelsey at 290s, about as close as we can get. Cam Jurgens is close to the same thing, maybe a little bigger. So he's going to need to get up to that 290 mark. But if he does, people are going to then use Kelsey as the precedent to say it's okay. The other reason I like this, Ryan Grubb, the OC for Seattle, was Parker Brailford's OC last year at Washington. Brailsford then follows the head coach that went to Bama, whose name's Kalen DeBoer. There it is. He follows DeBoer down to Alabama. So the connection there with Grubb could be a really solid one. It's a one-year deal for Connor Williams. So could totally see a world where they're looking for that long-term guy. And I think Brailsford would be a great fit. Then we get to the Saints at 43. I'm going to go Xavier Watts here. And, man, look, Tyrann Mathieu still playing great football. So, take this as no slight to the Honey Badger. But Watts is going to be your single high free safety. Dennis Allen also does run a good amount of cover 3. So, makes sense from that standpoint. Let Xavier Watts, who has been the best center field safety in college football the last 2 years. Caleb Downs does a little bit of everything. To me, it's Xavier Watts and Daniel Finneman from Purdue, who, ironically enough, they get to go head-to-head this week. They're the best free safety, center fielders in the country right now. And Watts also, my big knock on him was his tackling. As of right now, a 0% missed tackle percentage. So through 2 weeks, the tackling has been better. And if that trend does continue, I think he will get himself into the second round mix, maybe even higher. And I think Watts plays that center field single high spot, move Tyrann Mathieu around between the nickel and the box. You could even run some 2 high looks with both these guys. Allows you to make Honey Badger that much more versatile and not worry about who's on the back end. Because I do think Watts is a sizable upgrade over the other starting safety in New Orleans right now. Tampa Bay on the clock here at 44. I'm going to go Donovan Jackson here. Maybe a bit of a reach here. You see how low he is on the PFF board. I'm still a believer on the upside and the talent that's there from the former 5-star recruit. I think the movement skills are fantastic for the zone blocking scheme that Liam Cohen wants to run. He's got the athleticism and the skills that you need there. Hand placement's the thing that needs to get cleaned up for sure. But you already see how much of an impact Graham Barton's had on that run game and how good Bucky Irving looked running behind him in that first game of the year. I think Cody Mock's going to keep getting better at right guard. Plug Donovan Jackson in at left guard, and then over the course of kind of 2 to 3 off seasons, you've really repaired that interior offensive line that went over some major overhaul with the retirement of Ryan Jensen, Ali Marpet going and retiring as well, and then Alex Kappa going to Cincinnati, right? Like, they had a lot of those pieces all of a sudden disappear, and they got a 3-year span. You might be able to replenish those assets. Indianapolis Colts are next up at 45. Another interesting name and a holdover if you were around the channel last year. You know who Barrett Carter is. Really freaky athlete. Where I say Danny Stutzman's more of a downhill guy. Carter to me more sideline to sideline, more coverage based. But also with his athleticism, a very interesting blitzer. I don't think Gus Bradley would really use him in that role, so maybe there's a different linebacker I could have gone with here, but AJ Speed's playing good football. Zaire Franklin getting pretty deep in his career. Maybe they decide to move on from Zaire. I could see Barrett Carter being the guy they choose, and ultimately the guy who does replace him. And maybe he's more of the zone specialist there, but ultimately it'd be up to him and Speed. It'd be interesting to see, though, if this was the pick, would they use Carter as a pass rusher at all? Because I do think he is a solid blitzer there from the inside. Pittsburgh Steelers up at 46. I'm going to go Jahdae Barron, who had a really nice pick a week ago for the Texas Longhorns. A little bit smaller, not nearly as big as JPJ, but 5'11", solid weight, right around 200, where he's currently listed. Athleticism definitely checks out. Dante Jackson, he got a pick against the Falcons. To me, that was a great play call from Terrell Austin, kind of going into a cover 2 look where definitely wasn't what Kirk thought he was looking at. Also, Kirk Cousins played like some shit on that first week game, so let's not go ahead and get ahead of ourselves and crowning Dante Jackson the savior of the Steelers secondary too soon, because ultimately I do think it's going to be kind of more of the same, probably around a 60 overall PFF grade, a spot that can definitely be improved upon. He's also on an expiring deal, so corner a need one way or another. There's also a world where they do keep Dante Jackson around, and Jahdae Brown becomes a much-needed upgrade there in the nickel, because I know Benny Bishop's got some fans for the Steelers fandom, but I think his draft status is there for a reason. It's indicative of how the league sees him and where he probably ultimately stands in regards to the league's talent pool, as political as I can say that. So Jahdae Brown, Barron, could be your nickel guy, or he could be your outside guy. You also have to take into account Cam Sutton, 8-game suspension. What are the Steelers going to do after this year? That could be another guy who ultimately plays the slot for them next year. But corner to me, big spot. I think Barron could just easily be an upgrade over Dante Jackson. Speaking of Dante Jackson's now former team, Carolina Panthers, on the clock here at 47. I'm going to go Kemian Rucker, a guy for UNC that to me needs to shoot up this board big time. Really solid pass rusher, really solid run defender. It's just hard to find guys that play it both at a really high level, especially once you get here into the second round. And also solid size, 6'2", 265, someone who could play every down. And did you watch the Panthers-Saints game? And Derek Carr played well. Clint Kubiak called a hell of a game. The receivers were getting open. But and as much as I think that scheme is a great fit for Fuaga and Penning, and that might ultimately kind of elevate their play, part of the reason those tackles look so good is because DJ Wonnum's the best pass rusher on this team. Got to change that, and I think Kemian Rucker's a huge step in the right direction. Pick 48, I'm going to go Ashton Gelati. Could have been a pick for the Carolina Panthers as well. I was kind of going back and forth. But Gelati, inside-out flexibility. You already have a guy like that with Eric Armstead, but all the more merry, right? Or all the merrier. Let's get 2 of those guys you can be really flexible with. Trayvon Walker, yes, he had 2 sacks week 1. One was beyond a cleanup. Honestly, calling it a cleanup doesn't even do it justice. It's kind of insane that someone gets credit for a sack on that. The other sack he had was super impressive, so who knows? Trayvon Walker by the end of this year might be the guy that, sets a new precedent, right? Eventually these guys will figure it out, draft traits, and that's the talk of the NFL draft this year. or he just kind of is more the same. And if that's the case, I think this team would be wise to get another edge rusher in the building. Ashton Gelati, love the play strength of this guy. Yeah, like a great power rush element, and I think him as the power guy, Hines Allen as your more finesse rusher on the edge, Eric Armstead moving all around, sign me up for that on that Jags D-line. Browns then at 49. I'm going to go Amari and Hampton. We'll see what happens with Nick Chubb and if he can go back to being the same guy. I tend to think that he will versus he won't, but been wrong before, and another major knee injury. You also look at the age for Chubb. You can see a world where he just isn't the same guy. It looks sick behind that offensive line, though? A downhill runner like Amari and Hampton. Also, Hampton, 2 picks from now. Amari and Hampton as a Los Angeles Charger, hear me out, would be an awesome fit and would just be like the most Jim Harbaugh thing of all time. And it would be the most like Greg Roman fit of all time. So I thought about that. But here, the Browns might be looking for a running back. Hampton, I think, is a solid value. Now, 3 running backs in the top 50. Not often I get to say that in one of my mock drafts. Chicago Bears here at 50. I just want to go with the best receiver, right? Keenan Allen. Nothing saying they have to bring him back after, the season, and plus the reports of him getting up to 230. They might be looking to move on anyways. And like Xavier Restrepo would be a solid slot guy, but he's probably slot only, so that kind of limits what you want to do with Rome and DJ Moore, using them as a mismatch guy who can also play on the inside. Juice Wells, I'm really intrigued by. We'll talk about him later. But to me, the best of the bunch is Alec Ayumanner. So like it'd be criminal for me to draft someone who I think is worse than Ayumanner here. And Ayumanner could just be someone you play on the outside. He's your sacrificial X, to steal a term from Matt Harmon. And then you're using Rome and DJ Moore interchangeably outside and in the slot. I can sign up for that. And you're just keeping a strength to strength. You're keeping 3 really solid receivers around Caleb Williams, your former number 1 overall pick. Chargers, again, wish this could have been Amari and Hampton. But instead, I'm going to go John Monheim from USC. And I think Bradley Bozeman at this point, there might be a reason why the Panthers, after re-signing him, move on from him in a year. He just does not look like he has it anymore. And Monheim, also really solid mover, one of the best centers in football. To me, probably the second best center in football. And you see it right here, the gap grade, 69.7. They'll run some zone, but Greg Roman, it's downhill, it's north-south, so it's primarily gap, and I think Monheim is a really solid fit there and a great replacement for Bradley Bozeman. On to the Houston Texans. As mentioned, we're going to talk about Juice Wells. He comes off the board here. There were a ton of receivers last year that I was like mocking to the Houston Texans, and I was like, dude, if they get one more yak guy / field stretcher, that trio of Collins, whoever that guy is, plus Tank Dell, awesome, would make me super pumped up. They end up getting Stephon Diggs, which is like totally fine. Like, not mad about that whatsoever. Already 2 tugs during his Texans career. Juice Wells, though, if they decide to move on because they restructured that contract, so they got Diggs guaranteed this 1 year. We'll see what happens moving forward. They decide to let him hit the market, and he goes and gets a big contract elsewhere. Juice Wells is he's the kind of guy I was talking about last year. Great yards after the catch ability, but also we've already seen it this year for Ole Miss, again, albeit against bad competition. But we've already seen the field stretching ability too. So he might be that receiver I'm talking about. Field stretcher, sick yak weapon to be a nice compliment to Nico and Tank Dell there on the outside for Houston. Next up, the New York Jets. I'm going to go ahead and go to the receiver room once again. I'm going to go with Trey Harris. They showed a shot of Mike Williams on the sideline, and he himself looked like a ghost. He wasn't seeing ghosts. He himself looked like a ghost. And I don't know if he's just not in shape coming off the injury or what. 4 first-half snaps. I didn't see him at all in the second half. Correct me if I'm wrong. But doesn't look like he's going to be a factor, to say the least. And Lazard had 2 touchdowns, yes, but I don't think he nearly played as well as the stat line may say that he did. So I think receiver, especially if they're getting Aaron Rodgers to run it back one more time, they have just got to put all their eggs, like as many eggs in the receiver basket they can. Pass catcher basket. It can be tight ends too, for sure. I think Trey Harris, size, speed, field stretcher. You keep Garrett Wilson in the slot. With Harris, pushing safeties further back, that's what opens up the middle of the field and underneath stuff for Garrett Wilson. I think that's a nice 1-2 punch. It's almost kind of what they wanted Mike Williams to be, and I just don't know if he will be that. Next up, the Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to go Shamar Stewart here, edge rusher out of A&M. He's impressed so far. He's the other A&M edge rusher. You also have Shamar Turner, big size speed, freak guy there from the interior defensive line. All to say, A&M has got dudes up and down that defensive line. Turner, 6'4", 290, great build there. And kind of more of a 4-man front. So, how would that transition to more of a, 3-4 defense? But like I said earlier, nickel's the new base. Like, I'm pretty sure the Falcons a year ago ran nickel 70% of the time. So, like, it's all good. I think it'd be just fine in that 4-man front as a edge rusher, potentially opposite of Matt Judon. Curious to see what they do there. But especially if they don't re-sign Matt Judon, like, edge is going to be something they have to address and something we all thought they would address the 8th overall pick. But hey, Falcons fans, let me know how you're feeling. Like, it kind of sucks seeing Kirk Cousins play bad, and like you could have had someone else at the 8th overall pick. But I bet now you're like, okay, at least we have Penix waiting in the wings. Preferred world might have been like Cousins looks awesome, and you get a top 10 pick at edge. I get it, but I don't know. Falcons fans, let me know what you're feeling about that quarterback position as it currently stands. All right, then we get on to the Miami Dolphins here at pick 55. I'm going to go Sebastian Castro, just trying to get some additional safety help. As someone to be a running mate for Javon Holland, who to me one of the 3 best safeties in football, at least one of the 4 best. But I think getting him a running mate there. Castro playing a lot of slot, but also playing a lot of box. So you get some flexibility, which to me, for Anthony Weaver, you're creating a lot of chaos. You're creating a lot of confusion for offenses. I think another way to add to that is, okay, which safety is coming down in the box? Or are they both staying up? Or are they both going to come crashing down and be used as a blitz? Like just having 2 flexible guys that move all over the field, line up all over the field, sounds really, really fun. I think Anthony Weaver would be able to tap into that and maximize that a good bit here. So I like the idea of Castro plus Holland. Packers are next up at 56. I'm going to go to TJ Sanders. Kenny Clark's just getting up there at age. Van Ness, to me, more of an edge guy, so let's keep him out there. Maybe he's your Preston Smith replacement long term. TJ Sanders, plug him into the interior defensive line. Hopefully we get Devonta Wyatt playing to another level. Week 1 wasn't his best, but again, Brazil was a tough time to be any pass rusher. So hopefully he takes a step forward throughout the course of this year, and then TJ Sanders, I think, could be a really solid running mate with him. Then we get to the Dallas Cowboys at 57. I'm going to go Torrey Horton, another big size, speed, freak guy. I think someone that after the combine we're probably all talking about is like, oh my gosh, like, okay, where is he going to fit in? He's probably in the 2nd round because he's this big, and guys that size don't normally run this fast, all that sort of stuff. He's also like pretty clearly one of the best players on Colorado State's team. So a lot of volume, a lot of production coming his way. Brandon Cooks, we'll see what they decide to do with him. This could be your Cooks replacement as the speed threat who opens up CeeDee Lamb from the slot, doing everything he does. Also, don't hate the world where you get to see Torrey Horton and Brandon Cooks on the field. Both those speedy guys really opening up CeeDee Lamb underneath. Next up, Philadelphia Eagles on the clock at 50. I'm going to go Landon Jackson, 290-pound power rushing edge. Yeah, this is your Brandon Graham replacement, which I know Eagles fans, I've been saying for years, but eventually Brandon Graham is going to have to hang it up, and I think this is probably the year. Like, it's got to be, right? So I think Landon Jackson, that's just your power profile, hard edge setting, high-level run defender to replace Brandon Graham. Then we get to pick 59, Detroit Lions. I'm going to go Nick Anderson. Dude, 6'4", I just got to pull it up. 6'4", 219, great field stretching speed. We'll see what the official measurements and all that stuff looks like, and then plus the 40 time, all that. And like OU's offense has been awesome. Like Brett Arnold so far, it's been a little tough to watch, to be honest with you. But I still like Nick Anderson, and I still like, hold on, names, Deion Burks. I like both those guys. So I don't know, maybe they're guys that once we get postseason, get some opportunity to see them at the combine, Senior Bowl, things like that. We'll get the opportunity to see them in a more even situation. But I don't know. At the same time, I think Brett Arnold's been kind of hampered by his situation around him. So, but I don't think it's the receivers necessarily. But Nick Anderson, like, just even if Jameson Williams hits, like, one more speed guy. When you have the ultimate underneath slot space eater and Amon-Ra St. Brown, one more speed guy is not going to hurt you. So I think you get one more fast guy in the mix. And also, like, yes, Jameson Williams looked awesome week 1, and then he's immediately on the injury report. So, like, availability is a big part of this equation too. So Anderson's kind of also your Jameson Williams speed contingency as well. Next up, Cincinnati Bengals. Again, I have Tyler Booker coming off the board here. And again, I see him as more of a guard type. He is now playing left tackle for Alabama, but I don't think it's necessarily been his best tape so far. So I do think guard is ultimately the way I would go with him. And that left guard spot's been a huge problem for Cincinnati for a little bit now. Then we get on to the Buffalo Bills at 61, going back to the interior offensive line now. This is where I'm going to have Jaden Roberts come off the board. And Roberts, I think this is your Cyrus Torrance contingency here. So I think he's your plug-in option there at right guard, where he plays for the Crimson Tide. 62, JT Tuimoloau is going to come off the board here. Still feels like the Ravens could use some additional assets and some reinforcements there at edge, so I don't hate the taking a shot on a former 5-star guy at that spot at 62. All right, 63, San Francisco 49ers. This is going to be Patrick Payton off the board. A lot of hype for him going into the season. Wasn't necessarily the guy that I loved the most. That being said, I see some of where people are coming from, and if there's a place where he can get better and further developed, San Francisco's the spot. Drake Jackson's been a disappointment. Leonard Floyd, 1-year deal. Definitely feels like a spot they continue to add some assets. And then the last pick that we're going to have here in this first round mock is my boy Cornelius from Oregon. I think week 2 was much better, granted against Boise State, so like not an elite edge threat that you're worried about there. But that being said, you see the athleticism pretty much as soon as you start watching him. And I just don't think that Jawan Taylor contract has gone the way that the Chiefs thought it was going to go. And some of that's the penalties and, all that sort of stuff. But I just think the general level of play maybe isn't what he left Jacksonville, and it felt like he was on an upward trajectory. And I feel like his last year in Jacksonville has kind of been his high water mark. So he hasn't really lived up to that upward trajectory that the Chiefs thought they were buying into. But guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who went too high? Who went too low? Who's your favorite team? And what do you think of the haul that I gave your squad in my first 2-round 2025 mock draft up on the channel? Love to hear those thoughts down below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Do all those YouTube-y things, and I would really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow a ton and gets this video out to more and more draft fans like yourself. But that's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I am signing off.